to fight the unbeatable foe, to bear with unbearable sorrow, to run where the brave dare not go, to right the unrightable wrong, to love pure and chaste from afar, to try when your arms are too wearied, to reach the unreachable star. This is my quest, to follow that star, no matter how hopeless, no matter how far, to fight for the right, without question or pause, to be willing to march into hell for a heavenly cause. And I know if I'll only be true to this glorious quest, that my heart will lie peaceful and calm when I'm laid to my rest. And the world will be better for this than man, scorned and covered with scars, still strong with his last ounce of courage, to reach the unreachable, reach the unreachable, reach the unreachable
Come, gather, not into a common space, sharing a physical closeness we long for, precluded by wise choice, but come, gather into this common time and familiar faces of friends, the sound of shared voices proclaiming who we are, where we're going. That which resonates with our hopes, our dreams, our values. Come, gather. We are here in this space made of all spaces, and we share our becoming in this moment. Good morning. My name is Carol Johnson, and I'll be leading today's service. Janice Kimball will be presenting our message this morning. Video production and selection are by Roy Haynes. And now, I just want to welcome you with live from Fellowship Hall. It's our LCUUF Sunday service. Our announcements were on a slideshow before the service, and if you didn't see them, don't worry. They will be sent by email on Saturdays. A few notes. Starting March 6th, next week, our building will be again open to fully vaccinated participants. To reduce breakthrough infections, we ask that you wear a mask. To reduce crowding, we ask that you pre-register by email at reservations@lakechapalauu.org. We will acknowledge your reservation. Online Sunday services will continue to be available through Zoom. And now, a special welcome to our visitors. If you're visiting with us for the first time or have returned or reconnected after a long absence, we invite you to say your name and tell us where you're from. On Zoom, use the Zoom raise hand feature, or just turn on your video and wave your hand. We'll ask you to unmute. Is there anyone new with us on Zoom?
I don't see anyone.
All right. Our chalice lighting words today are by Eric Walker Wickstrom. We light this chalice for all who are here and for all who are not, for all who have ever walked through our doors, and for those who may yet find this spiritual home, for those we can't even yet imagine. For each of us and for us all, may this flame burn warm and bright. Now let us light our chalices with these words that we sing together.
We kindle this light in celebration for the life that we share. I used to believe in the days I was naive that I'd live to see a day of justice dawn. And though I will die long before that morning comes, I'll die while believing still it will come when I am gone. Someday when we are wiser and the world's older, when we have learned, I pray someday we may yet live to live and let live. Someday life will be fair, life will be fairer, need will be rare, need will be rarer, greed will not rob, greed will not pay us Godspeed. This bright millennium, this bright millennium on its way, let it come. Someday when we are wiser and the world's older, when things have changed, someday these dreams will all be real. Till then we will wish upon the moon. Change will come one day.
Each week, we take time to remind ourselves that we belong to a community which cares for each other. We do this by sharing any significant joys or sorrows in our lives. If you have a joy or sorrow to share today, you can type it into the chat now, and we'll read those aloud. First, let us voice our sorrows or concerns, whatever you or the world may be holding that is in need of our healing and caring thoughts. You're welcome to type sorrows and concerns into the chat box. Are there any sorrows to be shared on Zoom?
Yes, first from Devorah Kelly. Please light a candle for Robert Kelly, beloved husband of Devorah Kelly. He is no longer struggling with dementia. He's gone to his idea of heaven, a place where he can ski all day. And our daughter, who arrived today, not having seen him since last June, asking for prayers for a peaceful and safe journey. And concerns from Liz Mulder for the myriad victims of the Russian invasion to Ukraine, especially the children and the newly homeless. A concern from Colleen Berry, praying for the world peace and the people of Ukraine and Russia. And Kat Barnett, concerned for the 700 disappeared people in the last 3 years in Jalisco. That's it.
Now, let us recall the joys. Whatever you may be celebrating, whatever evokes a feeling of joy or peace for yourself or others. You're welcome to type joys in the chat box. Are there any joys to be shared from Zoom?
Yes, from Lynn Cleek. Please light a candle of joy for our visit with our daughter Serena and her best friend. It could not have been better. And from Roy, Roy's joy is that after 2 years to be back at the Lakeside Little Theater stage, performing with some wonderful and talented people in the musical A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Theater. We've received rave reviews for a musical that was created from scratch in less than a month. Tickets are still available for Monday and Tuesday. And that's all the joys for today.
And this candle from our care team represents those sorrows that are too raw, too difficult for us to share aloud. So many of us have had losses, partners, children, grandchildren, losses that are with us every day, losses that remain present with us every day. So many of us have had burdens, anger, frustration, fear, all of those things that weigh heavy on our hearts. We light this candle for all those unspoken sorrows.
Tragic images of children in the 1950s stricken with polio, a virus that struck fear in parents everywhere. In 1952, during the worst polio outbreak in U.S. history, 57,000 people were infected, 21,000 paralyzed, and 3,000 died, most of them children. Scientists worked to find a vaccine. Dr. Jonas Salk believed he had found the formula that would offer protection for the most vulnerable. To test the effectiveness, volunteers inoculated nearly 2 million children, some with the real vaccine and others with a placebo. The results were made public in 1955. The vaccine was effective. To assure people that it was safe, publicity pictures showed singer Elvis Presley getting one of the first shots. But getting a large number of people immunized would take years. There were critical shortages of the vaccine and public frustration. The government saw vaccine production and distribution as the responsibility of private pharmaceutical companies. And there was a disastrous error that temporarily stopped the program. One of the 6 companies licensed to make the vaccine failed to kill the live poliovirus before it was distributed. Instead, hundreds were injected with the virus. Many got sick. Some died. The incident led to a search for a different kind of vaccine, and in 1961 came Dr. Albert Sabin's oral vaccine. Across the U.S., people lined up to swallow a simple sugar cube that had been injected with a weakened live polio virus. It worked. Today, the Salk and Sabin vaccines are credited with leading to the virtual eradication of polio worldwide. Bob Buckaloo, KVUE News.
Our reading this morning is A Prayer on a Child's Vaccination Day by Katharine, Kline. For this moment that we've waited for getting through this together, for each child who holds out an arm and says, I'm ready, for the caregivers who sustain us, for the scientists who made this day possible, for the teachers who will breathe easier, for the frontline workers who keep things running, for the doctors and nurses who work through exhaustion, for our elders, the keepers of knowledge, for the makers of masks, for the bakers of bread, for the words that soothed when hugs were not possible, for finding new ways, for making it through, for those who didn't make it through, for all that we've learned, for all that we've lost, for the healing we need, for the tears of relief, for the fears we still hold, for the journey ahead, for the future, for hope for each other. And now we will present Janice Kimball giving our presentation this morning.
Hello from the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in sunny Ajijic, Mexico. I'm Janice Kimball. I'm usually in an electronic wheelchair, so I'm very happy to give this talk today seated in front of our podium. I will talk about the effects of polio and post-polio from a personal perspective and explore how this virus relates to the COVID virus and what we can learn from that connection. The year was 1953. I was 13 years old. I remember having a sore throat, fever, and stiff neck, and the doctor's diagnosis of a touch of sunstroke after days at the community pool. The next day, not wanting to spoil the family vacation, I said I felt better. We arrived at our cabin on Lake Superior. The following morning, my parents discovered me trembling and burning with fever, my thumbs in paralysis. They bundled me into the back seat of the car and made a mad dash to Ann Arbor and the University of Michigan Hospital, 4 hours away. A couple of weeks later, I was pronounced cured and given an appointment for physical therapy, but I knew I wasn't cured. At school, I would hide in the bathroom until after the last bell had rung, not wanting the other students to see I was weak, one of the pack who jumped further and further behind as they walked on. But who would listen to a teenager? It was a period in time when being identified as a polio survivor was not a smart thing to do, especially in 1953, the year the polio vaccine came out. Seemingly everyone wanted to forget there ever was a polio epidemic. My first husband didn't know I was a polio survivor when he married me, My 3 children didn't know that I had once had polio until they were middle-aged. The medical community chose to ignore notices that they all received 20 years later about the after effects of the poliovirus. According to Post Polio groups, we all have been humiliated by doctors who dismissed our symptoms. Seeing no withered limbs, they condescendingly assured me that I never had polio. Perhaps when I was in my 20s, I quit writing the illness down when asked for my medical history. My periods of energy, followed by dysfunctional exhaustion, they convinced me was a bipolar disorder. It is only since I joined Post Polio groups a few years ago that I learned that at some time, almost every polio survivor was given that diagnosis. And many of us took lithium, a dangerous drug, made our condition worse, not better. Surprisingly, current research now shows that we became a successful and well-educated group of people. Hard-driving, type A personalities. I guess that describes me. Anyway, while I struggled with a lifetime of exhaustion, I moved to Mexico 23 years ago, where I opened the Kimball Gallery in Chapala and was awarded the National Cámara de Comercial Award for my paintings of Jalisco life, and had a solo exhibition at the Casa de Cultura in Tlaquepaque, known as El Refugio. About 14 years ago, I built what is now the Kimball Urzula Weaving Studios and Gallery in West Ajijic, where Francisco and I live and work today. About 8 years ago, holding my arm up to paint proved to be too exhausting. My life as a painter was over. I went on to become a writer as well as a designer of the original tapestries that can be seen in our studios today. Soon after that, walking became too exhausting, so I began getting around by going chair to chair, spaced about 10 feet. About a year later, I could only stay awake for 2-hour intervals 2 or 3 times a day. I was treated for depression, although I wasn't depressed. When that was to no avail, I went to the United States and was admitted to the Henry Ford Sleep Study Center and got the worst possible news. I had slept like a baby and they couldn't find a thing wrong with me. I was so humiliated. I sat in shame in my hospital gown at the end of an examination table before dressing to go home. The doctor holding my records sat on a stool in front of me, and he asked, "Is there anything on your list of previous illnesses that is not listed here?" "Polio," I stammered. The doctor immediately looked at my feet and repeated, "Drop foot. You have drop foot." Half a dozen neurologists appeared within 10 minutes, and I was diagnosed as post polio. And I was thrilled. At last, they found something wrong with me. I was told to never do anything that tired me, and that I would need to rely on assisted devices and learn how to live without expending energy. They made an appointment to see the pulmonologist and referred me to rehabilitation therapy. But I had learned what I needed to know and flew back home to my village in Mexico to begin research about post-polio. In results similar to our COVID studies today, the symptoms, trauma, and after effects of polio vary to the extent that connecting the information could seem like putting together a complex puzzle that had a few pieces missing. Viruses need no clear, specific answers. Dr. Richard L. Bruno is an internationally recognized as the world's foremost expert on post-polio. Most of the post-polio information in this talk is based on his book, The Polio Paradox, and chronic fatigue syndrome. The other source I consistently trust is the Mayo Clinic, which describes the causes of post-polio this way. When post-polio virus infects your body, it affects motor neurons, which carry electrical impulses between your brain and your muscles. Polio infection damages or destroys these motor neurons. The remaining neurons, over a period of years, this stress becomes more than the neuron can handle, leading to deterioration of the sprouted fibers and eventually the neuron itself. This is why I can no longer walk. Motor neurons have died off, resulting in paralysis, so to speak. Yet, it is very painful. The nerve sprouts grow to yet more sprouts that die off, and they keep trying to regenerate. The survivor is constantly in a state of exhaustion from either degenerating these sprouted fibers or generating new fibers, usually at night, which is a very painful process. Polio has been around for much of human history. Epidemics have come and gone throughout the developed world. 1952 was the worst polio epidemic in our nation's history. Polio can cause paralysis, yet the majority of victims, especially those in rural areas, never realized they had polio because its trajectory is brief and the symptoms mimic that of the flu. This means there are many people who suffer from post-polio today who are unaware they ever had polio, especially when they had the disease as infants. Polio was originally known as infantile paralysis because in the beginning of the epidemic, the virus attacked only young children in what appeared to be an airborne virus. It seems that scientists first suspected a genetic weakness to this virus because so often it would strike more than one child in a household. It was only in the peak years of the epidemic that adolescents, teenagers, and young adults became affected with the crippling disease. Clusters of victims began popping up in communities scattered across the United States, leading many scientists to suspect that the highly contagious virus had mutated, but had it? I remember signs posted on telephone poles in 1953 telling parents to keep their children home because of the polio epidemic. Nonetheless, I went to the community pool that was loaded with other youngsters that had that hot summer. I don't know how many were infected with the virus at that pool, but by the time I returned home from the hospital, pools nationwide had shut down. It seems that only until that period in time did the scientific community realize that they were not dealing with an airborne disease. They were dealing with a disease that was transmitted through feces, and indeed, that was the reason it had primarily affected children. So many dry runs. On admission to the hospital, I was put in isolation and given a spinal tap that confirmed that I had polio. I was lucky. If I had been brought in after the fever subsided and I was no longer contagious, it would have been impossible to give a confirmed diagnosis. The only way it can be confirmed that a person once had the poliovirus is through a post-mortem biopsy of the brain. This made it next to impossible to track the spread of the disease, the who, what, when, and where, so to speak. According to Dr. Bruno, the symptoms of, as well as post-mortem studies of the brain, show that chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia very closely mimic that of polio. Post-polio syndrome is not a syndrome, Dr. Bruno points out, but more related to an autoimmune disease. There are ongoing studies that prove that there is a close relationship between these autoimmune diseases. Are they variants, mutations? That has not been ruled out. This information would be extremely valuable in studies of the COVID virus. The government grants that supported the scientific studies of post-polio syndrome to the world's 20 million polio survivors were shelved when their research money was all diverted to the AIDS epidemic. The last time I checked, maybe 5 years ago, the yearly federal grant for post-polio research was only $40,000. Now, how many stamps does that buy? Even though it is now estimated that more than 40% of the public actually had the poliovirus, many were asymptomatic, like COVID. That seems like a huge percentage, yet it still fell short of the percentage needed for herd immunity. Polio was all but eradicated in the United States because of the public's cooperation in taking the vaccines. We are fortunate that tracking the COVID can be done through testing. Can you imagine the international chaos that would ensue if this information were not available to us? Can you imagine how much greater the damage, how much more confusion and time spent running down dead-end information? Viruses have a lot in common. From examining many aspects of post-polio, I believe it gives us one step up in projecting what the future consequences might be for the survivors of the COVID pandemic. The Franklin Delano Roosevelt story is symbolic of what I call the fiasco of our mismanagement of polio. I was a World War II baby. I remember replays of movies taken during presidential campaign where Roosevelt waved from the decorated caboose of the train. Years later, when suffering from the weakness from polio, I wondered how he had the energy to do that when both legs were crippled with polio, a virus that affects the whole body. I wonder why both of his legs were polio when the polio victims I had seen and read about were crippled asymmetrically. Also, Roosevelt was crippled at the age of 39, which would have been a highly unusual age for polio victim. Most of the scientific data we have regarding polio was financed through the March of Dimes and the Roosevelt family, who built a medical resort and clinic that is still helping polio victims to this day. This very week, I searched the internet and discovered that the medical community now believes that Roosevelt had Guillain-Barré syndrome and not polio at all. I thought, how crazy is that? I thought about the times now, more than a year ago, that I sang happy birthday 2 times while washing my hands to make sure they were clean enough, leaving my groceries in a bag for a day so they would not be too contaminated for me to touch. Of toilet paper scenarios that either brought us to shame or made us roll over laughing. How far are we come? How fast are we coming? And how are we going in regards to the COVID pandemic? Or is it pandemics? To be sure, I will follow all the recommendations of the Center for Disease Control and the scientific community in regards to protecting me and my fellow humans. Even though I know the many past blunders of the science community, at least they can be documented, are not undocumented theories too many times by unqualified people. Both the poliovirus and the COVID virus have have post-polio and COVID infection damages that can vary widely. They can both leach from the spinal cord into the brain. It is my hope that when looking into the past, we can not only find a better way to deal with the COVID pandemic, but also begin the studies needed to help its victims in its aftermath. We need to give thanks that every day we can track this disease through antibodies. Let's hope this is not a virus like polio is that will carry on throughout humanity. Thank you very much for listening.
And now, let us extinguish our chalices with these words which we read together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we keep in our hearts and share with all the world. Words for Hard Times by Maureen Killoran. No matter how weak or how frightened we may feel, we each have gifts that can make a difference in the world. In this coming week, may you do at least one thing to support the broken, to welcome the stranger, to celebrate what is worthy, to do the work of justice and love. Be strong, be connected. Each day, act so you may be a little more whole.
Have you ever felt like nobody was there? Have you ever felt forgotten in the middle of nowhere? Have you ever felt like you could disappear? Like you could fall and no one would hear? Well, let that lonely feeling wash away. 'Cause maybe there's a reason to believe you'll be okay. 'Cause when you don't feel strong enough to stand, you can reach out your hand. And oh, someone will come running, and I know they'll take you home. Even when the dark comes crashing through, when you need a friend to carry you, and when you're broken on the ground, you will be found. So let the sun come streaming in, 'cause you'll reach up and you'll rise again. Lift your head and look around. You will be found.
Call out, you're a little less alone. But if you only say the word, from across the silence, your voice is heard. Oh, someone will come running. Crashing through, when you need a friend to carry you, when when you're broken on the ground, you will be found. So let the sun come streaming in, 'cause you'll reach up and you'll rise again. If you only look around, you will be found. 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 Out of the shadows, the morning is breaking, and all is new. It's filling up the empty, and suddenly I see that all is new. You are not alone. 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 You are not alone.
Even when the dark comes crashing through, when you need a friend to carry you, when you're broken on the ground.
So let the sun come streaming in, 'cause you'll reach up and you'll rise again. If you only look around, you will be found. Even when the dark comes crashing through, when you need someone to carry you, you will be found. You will be found. You will be found.
You will be found.
You will be found. You will be found. You will be found.
Hi everyone, Sarah here. Thank you so much for watching our brand new Voctave video, and a special thanks to everyone who participated in our Voctave virtual choir. You sounded absolutely amazing. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on all of your notifications, and head on over to Instagram and follow us at Voctave. And don't forget to pick up a copy of our brand new album, The Corner of Broadway and Main Street, Volume 2. There is something for everyone to love on this album. Pikachu loves it. Baby Yoda loves it. Even miniature dachshunds love it. Right, Wilbur? Right, Wendy? Bye.